I am offering you this book because I know it to be both beautiful and useless. It teaches nothing, preaches nothing, arouses no emotion. It is a stream that runs into an abyss of ashes that the wind scatters and which neither fertilize nor harm. I put my whole soul into its making, but I wasn't thinking of that at the time, only of my own sad self and of you, who are no one. I finished this book yesterday in kind of a poignant manner, I suppose. It was kind of as the sun was going down, and I'm probably misremembering it slightly, but it seemed to me that the sun basically went down the moment I finished it, and I was therefore shrouded in shadow underneath a tree where most of the people had gone home already, and I was just kind of in a similar mood to how I've been throughout reading the book of Disquiet, which is a kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, a kind of melancholy, but in a metaphysical sense. There is a word, saudade, which is a Portuguese word, and it pretty much esoteric to Portuguese or Brazilian people. And that is apparently quite tricky to translate into English because it doesn't really exist, but it is a kind of melancholy or nostalgia, but usually in association with poetry, prose, or music, which is very poignant, I would say. Especially, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong as well, because it takes me ages to remember anything these days. Saudade, that's what I'm remembering. I'll put it up. And how I'm going to try and approach this is, in one way, how the book was manifested, put together over the years, over the many, many years, and also just how it comes out, really. I want this review to be incomplete in the same manner that the book of Disquiet, or Livro do Desasego, I'm saying that wrong, I know, but I'm sure it sounds nice when you say it properly. And the imperfection of it is its perfection, essentially. Anyway, I'm rambling. So yeah, I finished this in a park, and I've been reading it mostly outside, and I'm not really sure why. Well, I kind of am this morning. It's funny. I mean, here's a story. I'll try and be a bit more coherent here. But I've been reading in the rain recently, and I thought that it was my own ego was telling me, "Oh, you just like doing that. You're a bit weird anyway." And the reason you like doing it is because when you get the nice kind of drizzle in the air, it kind of keeps people away, and you can sit in a park or wherever you want and be just by yourself and be with nature as well at the same time, because, you know, birds and everything were still kind of flocking about nearby, insects and all that kind of stuff. And I thought this was all of my own volition. My will made this happen. But I've realised this morning that it was this book that has actually made me go out into the rain to read. Mainly because of what it describes throughout it, and the way Pessoa will take something as banal as rain and somehow encapsulate the feeling of rain, or of the multitude of feelings that it can provoke. And convey it in a manner that is so palpable that it gets inside of your subconscious, I would say. And that's just one element of it, literally the element of rain. I mean, it has a multitudinous, voluminous and mountainous amount of different feelings and emotions that it provokes and evokes at the same time. There were parts in this, I remember, I'll take it back. When I first started reading it when I was in Spain, and I largely put this to be one of the books that actually got me away from ebooks completely. Like, I do not read ebooks now, and I kind of refuse to. And I'm an advocate against them in their entirety. And I remember starting the book of Disquiet via ebook. I mean, I'm not discrediting anyone who does read it or read them. It's fine. If you're poor, money's an issue, and you just want to read, fucking have at it. You know, go nuts. It's totally fine. I respect that more. But if you can afford it, or if you can make adjustments to your life so that you can afford to buy books instead, do that. Because there's... I don't even know how to describe it with this, but this is why we put them together into books, and that's why they're important, I would say, overall. So anyway, I started it in Spain, and another reason I didn't carry on reading it was something that I am still oblivious to, I would say. I think it was partially due to the fact that I saw how overwhelmingly good the content of it is, and the quality of the writing, the poetry of it all, and also how intimidating that can be at times, and additionally that I just wasn't really ready to go into it too much. I did recognise quite early on that it doesn't actually matter in which order you read it, and that still holds very, very true. And I'll get to that a bit later on, but I did read it chronologically, if you can even call it that, to be honest, with the Book of Disquiet, because the manner in which it was brought about is so kind of mysterious and locked in a kind of spiritual mysticism, then it kind of renders the whole idea of time being linear completely immaterial. It doesn't matter. But I did read it for the sake of this channel and these reviews. I generally will read something in chronological order, or the order in which it's presented. And it took me quite a while to get through it, I suppose. I think I started it about possibly 6 weeks ago. And I was reading it in the local park quite a lot. And what I found quite often was I could read this for like 15, 20 minutes, and then I'd look up. And I don't know whether some of you might relate to this, but I remember being a kid sometimes and coming out of the cinema, for instance, and I'd be so engrossed in the film's reality and of the world that was being presented to me and the narrative that I got lost in, that it would take a while to adjust after coming out of the cinema or the auditorium, and I'd just be like in a daze, basically. And this is what this fucking book does every 20 minutes. Like, the power of the writing in this it's indescribable, I would say, overall. And it's also in its completely paradoxical nature. I feel contentedly traumatized by this book. Like, satisfied with its enigmatic nature. Like, I can't really get over how paradoxical the whole experience of it is. The history of it is, not to mention. I mean, to mention Pessoa here, to go off, because I'm going to go all over the place with this. I don't give a shit. This book was conceived over a lifetime. It is supposedly told from the perspective of a heteronym of Fernando Pessoa's, that of Bernardo Suarez, or Soares, sometimes I like to call it, because it's to soar. And he will say that it is the autobiography of a man that never existed, of a non-existent being. And that's just to get into the like a little bit of it. And a heteronym is basically a pseudonym, but Pessoa didn't like the idea of it being just another name for himself. He preferred them because his creations had their own kind of backgrounds, histories, writing styles, all of this stuff. He had up to something like 72 of them in his lifetime as well. He did have a main feature of them, which only amounted to about 3 or 4, maybe 5. And Bernardo Suarez was his self-heteronym, is what he called it. So it is the most closely related to Fernando Pessoa as the personality. And even Bernardo Suarez was the one who came in later. There was another one called, I think it was Vincent Guedes, or Vicente. I don't know whether you say it differently, but yeah. Vincent Guedes was the original one. He kind of started the whole process off, but Pessoa eventually just killed him off and replaced him with Bernardo Suarez, and there are quite similar kind of backgrounds to the two, so I don't know whether that was him being evolved or something like that. But really, I'm going to relate it all to Pessoa. I do think it is a book of his life, essentially, but the reach of the whole piece, I've never read anything like it. Honestly, I've never read anything like it. It's the most unique piece of literature, or anti-literature, I should say. You can't even categorize it. It goes beyond, like, it sat in a trunk as well for decades before it was published in 1982. It was first published in Portuguese. But it had been sitting in a trunk since 1935, I believe, was the year of Fernando Pessoa's death at the age of 47. So it was literally his lifetime in years until it was published for the first time. And it is from the perspective of one of his pseudonyms, or heteronyms, if you want to pay heed to his own creation there. And it's just... And what it is just extracts, or fragments, as he describes them in some passages, of musings that aren't really related, but they are at the same time. There is a kind of... I mean, Pessoa might describe it as tedium is what kind of runs through the whole piece, or the suaudade, the kind of melancholic linkage between each passage. But what it really does to you is just kind of takes you out. I did feel like a metaphysical mourning at times, like just looking up, coming back into reality, whatever that is. And it will make you question your own thinking. It will make you think about your own thinking. Not necessarily in a good way either. Sometimes it will just leave you quite devastated. I mean, thinking about it now, I'm a bit overwhelmed by what it's done to me, and how it's kind of got into my way of thinking. It feels like it's changed neurological patterns in some regard, and I think it's one of the most powerful things I've ever read in my life. And for all the opposite reasons and expectations that you normally would have of a book. I mean, it's not even complete by his own kind of confession. It's not a complete piece. It's like a book that doesn't exist, that does exist. It's... I could go on and on in this same kind of line of thinking, where you just get taken away. But it is also incredibly sad, and nothing encapsulates the human condition like this book. I would say that. I want this book to put psychologists out of business, essentially. I think if you read this, you will realise that all of your troubles and turmoils are all bullshit. And you can take your nothingness and actually embrace it. Become one with it. Dream rather than think. Daydream. I mean, that's what he's more of an advocate of. I've been envisioning myself rereading this in Lisbon, and it has made me really want to visit there and go to see the statue of Pessoa that sits outside the Brasileria, I think it's called, which was a cafe that was around at the time. And it is of him just sitting there kind of thing as well. And I'm also aware of the paradox in that thought, because Pessoa wouldn't want me to do that. He'd say, nah, let Suarez, my fictional non-entity who wrote a biography of his non-existence, take you there. And you can imagine it. You don't need to take action. It's almost like everything in this book is like the exact antithesis of what you've learned in the past about how to exist and how to live, because it's all the same to him. Like, who's to say that the dream you dream is worth any less than the dream, especially to the one who's dreaming the dream? Meaning, like, you cannot really differentiate between life and dreaming, because it's all one. And all of it is a delusion. It's all illusory. And it's all devastating for that very fact, because of our own longing for meaning and significance and of a kind of narrative to our lives, whereas there isn't one. And Pessoa knew that. And like Nietzsche described Dostoevsky as being the only psychologist he ever learned anything from, I would say that Pessoa knew the human condition better than anyone I've read before. He realised that there isn't one self inside of him. He had a kind of issue with the I think therefore I am, with Descartes' analysis of that, or theory, because he really saw the fact that he had many, many, many selves within him. He had selves within his selves. And this is a book within a book that doesn't really quantify a book. Like, it's like the fucking holy grail of literature, but almost in a devilish and demonic way, where it's because it's anti-literature in essence. It's not, but it is the exact opposite of what you would normally expect, or what you've been brought up to think or conceive of as a novel. And that's just what makes it so fucking brilliant. It's in that Kafkaesque, literal, I never completed a novel sense. It is complete in its incompleteness. And I mean, there's what the translator, I forget his name, Richard Zenith, mentions in the beginning and at the end, is that there's no real way of reading this. I would say it's like an atheist Bible, essentially, or a non-believer's Bible, at least. You don't need to read it in chronological order. I would say that you actually shouldn't overall, now that I've read it in that manner. You can pick it up and read any passage and be taken on some kind of metaphysical journey. You can feel like you visited Lisbon at the time of Pessoa's living there. And just be not only enamored but devastated by its precision and its abstract brilliance, of everything it encapsulates and somehow encapsulates. That's what's kind of incredible about the piece. It's on the face of many of the passages, there's a simplicity to it, but also a really deep and dense nature that you could dismiss, I suppose, in some moments, depending on the mood or the self that you're currently inhabiting. But also how it kind of gets inside of you, really makes you contemplate everything, essentially. Not only about yourself, but of how you perceive things, of how you think about things, of fucking everything. I'm going to keep probably rambling on about the same shit. And in a way, Pessoa does throughout the book, but in a manner that kind of seems to justify rather than overexert or embellish too much. It kind of like, he knows he's a fucking genius. That's the thing. But he also knows the pointlessness of his own genius, and of how it's actually made him very separate, atomized from all others around him. So there is a tragedy to it all at the same time. And the fact that he wrote it without ever really conceiving of it being published, and maybe he did in some regard, but he just left it. And some of the passages he dated and put, so there was a kind of idea of some kind of linear structure, and then after a while he abandoned that. He wrote it throughout his whole lifetime, pretty much. I think the last 16 years he was writing it, he abandoned all the dates. He'd often initialize passages in the top corner, B of D, and he question mark some of them. Others, like, there was like he put the heteronym in there, like as an initial. Is that him talking in this regard? Like, who is it? I feel like this book is the answer to Mona Lisa's smile, essentially. It gives the answer to every riddle you can ever conceive of, except for the reason that riddles exist, which I think is a slight paraphrase from what he described it as well. And yeah, I'm totally blown away by it, I have to admit. It's devastated me in a way that I welcomed completely, that I wanted in the end. And like I mentioned before about feeling like I was making the decision to go and read in the rain, it was totally to do with this book. This book made me do it because it got into my subconscious, and then my ego got in the way and confused it for being my own of my own volition. And it wasn't at all. It was because of this. And I've only really just realised that this morning. And that's just one little testament to its power. I believe it's doing a lot more than that. And I think it will throughout the rest of my life. Honestly, it's that fucking good. Like, it's beyond. It's like every artist's dream, I would say. But also in a kind of anti-life manner. It's like there's a kind of giving up in it, even though the work in of itself is a contradiction to that. There is a kind of helplessness to the whole thing, as if he can't quite get rid of the fever that is driving him to write it. Whereas at the same time, he realizes its own futility and utter meaninglessness, yet he goes on with it anyway. So in a way, there's hope within its hopelessness. Or it's advocating hopelessness over hope, whilst the whole time everything's combined. That, like, the paradox is essential to everything that runs throughout the whole piece, and of what he's kind of advising throughout life. So to take the title, the Book of Disquiet, even that changes its meaning throughout the read or throughout different passages, whereas it can be of the existential anguish, which I think most people would look at, especially on an initial basis or even before they've picked it up. But also of a different one where it's kind of outside of the human condition or experience, where it's a disquiet with reality itself, or with our perception of reality. I think he describes throughout where you look at a landscape and it can seem so complete, and in your mind or perception, it is whole, but it's never whole. It's always changing. You're just blind to it. And really, when you look at what a landscape really is, it's just the limitation of your perception. Really, the landscape, it doesn't exist outside of your own mind. So the phenomenological, I can't say that fucking word, but I'll learn it next time. And yeah, it's breathtaking, I would say. But at the same time, there is a real tragedy to it all. I mean, even the words like pessimism and optimism kind of seem redundant when trying to describe this. It is beyond that. It's kind of, you know, even one's own suffering becomes a tedium. That's a word that kind of comes up quite a lot. and how that is even perceived. Like the other part of the title being the Book of Disquiet. The disquiet can also be within the dreams that you're dreaming and also the life that you're living. Sometimes to take action is to think. Whereas that's the whole aim for Pessoa, is to not think, to just kind of gaze through life, let it happen. And that's about it. I don't even know what to fucking else to say. I'm mumbling my words, and you just read it. I can't really say much more about it, to be honest. It's one of those, like, you need this book. You need it for when you start to take life too seriously. When life kind of grabs you and takes all your attention and makes you worry over things that just aren't worth worrying over, and stressing over things that don't really exist outside of your perception. It's like none of it matters. And the horror of that realization is still within this book. It's still noted. But again, even that is just another kind of delusion on top of a delusion. Like, it's all a dream. Like, that's what there's some moments where he kind of screams out, in a sense, of it, in his disquietude and despair, where it's like some people don't even realize that the dreams that they have are no different to the ones that they're living in their day-to-day existence anyway, in their consciousness, or when they are conscious. It's all connected. It's all the same fucking thing. The guy was like, he wasn't just ahead of his time, he was just ahead of the curve of everybody's and everyone around him in a lot of regards. The fact that he wrote it as well without really... Maybe I get a feeling like he kind of knew that it would get published at some point, provided it wasn't, ruined by some natural disaster or frivolously given away by some dumbass relative. But thankfully it wasn't, and it was discovered and put together and analysed, and just like the history behind it is just as intoxicating as the book itself, which can only really complements it. And Pessoa, the man, I mean, nuts. But nuts in a way where he's like so self-aware of his dissociation that he can't be crazy. It's like he's completely sane in his utter insanity. I'm just coming up with completely contradictory phrases here, but I do think that that's what is truly encapsulated by the book itself. Again, it's one of the most unique experiences. Really, like, words can't really express how good it is, and how he manages to take you away to places without really describing anything a lot of the time. Like something as banal as the weather, which is usually something that writers are told to steer away from. He takes it and manages to, like I mentioned before, he gets into the sensation of rain somehow, and he takes you there. He makes you feel it again. He gives you catharsis whilst you're in your utter self-approved traumatization. And it's he's knocked me for 6 with this, and I'm going to leave it at that. I think that's I envision this review being such a homage to the book itself, and I'm hoping that comes across in some regard. But I'm also realizing as well that the imperfection is sometimes enough. Don't strive for completeness. I think that's kind of the message behind it all, I suppose. It doesn't matter. Nothing's ever finished, really, except when it's finished and when it doesn't exist. This book is self-aware of the fact that it will one day never be read by anyone ever again, merely because it's been destroyed. It doesn't exist anymore. It's self-aware of its complete and utter futility. And how I can convey that, I believe, maybe captured in this stuttering wreck of a fucking review. But yeah, I would say just read it for yourself. Keep it by your bedside table. Use it as something to get out of yourself when you need to. Because it will. It will make you realise just how stupid and pointless all of your troubles are in a comforting and sometimes harrowing way. Embrace it. That's the human condition. Thank you very much for watching this. Let me know what you think of this book. Maybe you can articulate it in a better manner than I have today. And yeah, thank you, Pessoa, for writing it. I think you're posthumously laughing. Really, I do get there is a sense of the humour in the piece as well, a little bit of the ironical sentiments and displays throughout. But it's an incredible piece, really is. Read it. I'm gonna go. I'll see you next week. Thanks.